Hi, I'm Molly.
And I'm Jamie, and this is our From the Pasture with Hired Hand podcast. As the owners of Hired Hand website software, we've been developing websites and creating internet marketing strategies for livestock breeders for the past 10 years.
The majority of our customers are involved in the breeding of registered animals, such as Texas Longhorns, Highland cattle, horses, and white-tailed deer, where the pedigrees are very important. The From the Pasture with Hired Hand podcast examines many of the differences in raising pedigreed livestock for maximum profit. Join us and learn what we're covering today.
Today, our listeners are in for a treat. If you're wanting to learn more about some of the original foundation bloodlines, such as WR and Yates, then definitely stay tuned. Joining me today is James Farr with Farr Cross Longhorns, located in Terrell, Texas. James has been breeding registered Texas Longhorns since 1997. And on his website, he says, if you're looking for tip-to-tip measurements, they won't be found here. James goes on to write that he and his family are interested in breeding and preserving the original type of Longhorn. Thank you so much for joining me today, James.
Thank you for having me. I feel honored to be here and get to talk about the old cattle.
Good. Well, why don't you start by just telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your program?
Well, it's not a big deal. We started, like I say, raising these in the mid '90s, and we've had a couple of different places that we leased, and finally ended up with some where we are now here east of Dallas, and I guess my wife and I are the only ones here that that do anything. Well, I mean, we've had these, like I say, since with the beginning, and it's just us, and we have I think right now probably around 65 or 70 mama cows that we take care of. So that's kind of how we got to where we are and what we do right now.
Well, I would encourage everyone that's listening to definitely go look at your website. One thing, when you came to us to build the website a few years ago, one thing that I really enjoyed specifically about your site is you've been raising Longhorn since '97, which was right around when I graduated high school. And all of the animals on your website look exactly like the ones that I used to show, that we used to have in our pasture. So it was just this great hit of nostalgia, just, looking through the animals and some of their, genetic information and stuff. It's funny how that can bring back all those memories of, those fond years.
Well, when we got started, to get these animals, I really didn't have any idea. But in '97, there weren't a 50-inch horned animal was the top of the mark. And I remember lots of breeders saying, hey, man, if I just had a herd of 50-inch horned cows, I'd be, I'd have it made, I'd be at the top of the mark. And this tip to tip thing just kept going and getting bigger and bigger, and being not having endless resources is the best way for me to put it. Is that I couldn't get in the horn race, so I had to stay with something that would that at that point something that I could just have. And these cattle, like I say, they were the benchmark at that time, and probably even more so, because that's about the time people was using the terminology of tip to tip. And
I feel like, when I was in high school, and granted, I was from the show background mostly, but, there wasn't a lot of talk about it. It was, focused more on the other traditional show ring aspects of conformation and body and stuff. And then I went away to college and came back to a few events and, then got more involved after college. And just in that short time, it was, that focus, it was definitely interesting, the shift to the tip to tip stuff.
Well, when I first got hooked up with Hired Hand, of course, y'all have an incredibly good reputation, and that's why I came to y'all to help me build a website and really not help me. Y'all actually did it. and, and carried me through that. And that's been nothing but a really good deal for our program, because it kind of helped us go to another level that, that I wasn't experiencing before. So that was good. But talking to you and just, you almost said then what you just said now about, kind of taking you back to where well, that's exactly what the reason we do what we do is because that's what they are. That's where they started. And if you want to raise big, heavy beef cows, well, that was my option then too. And I wanted to stay with these original type cattle. And I've heard that more and more. And with the exposure that I've gotten from hired hand, people have found and seen my website, and they would say, man, it's really kind of refreshing to go back down memory lane, because you just don't see these cattle anymore. And that sadly, that's the truth. There's just not very many of these cows around. So yeah, it's been fun in that regard alone, just to have people come to you and say, man, I like what you're doing. Jim Curry always told me that the pendulum would swing. He just didn't say how long it'd take.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's Jim was full of great advice, I feel like, right?
He was. He certainly was.
Well, I feel like we got off track there a little bit, but it was good. But let's try to hop back on track. So
Okay.
What made you decide that you wanted to raise Longhorns? What was kind of that big decision before you got
started? It started out that I primarily because I wasn't from a cattle background, I needed an ag exemption, and having working a full-time job in town and everything, I had to have something that I felt like could be maintenance. Mm-hmm. The lower maintenance animal, the better. And so Longhorns just kind of rose to the top in that category pretty easily. And with just a little bit of research, and if you believe what you read about them and all that stuff, the easy calving and their hardiness, everything about them that we love, that's what kind of pushed me towards the Longhorn 100%.
Do you remember who you got some of your first ones from, or kind of that process when you decided you wanted to get started? Maybe some of those first ranches you visited or the herds you purchased from?
Oh, nobody that ever knew J.B. Hunn could forget him. His middle name was Marvelous, and he didn't mind telling you. And JB helped me immensely and got me started, and he was about promoting the Longhorns no matter what, and he I don't know that he was certainly knowledgeable enough about the different pedigrees and stuff at that time to kind of send you one direction or another, but he often had such a variety of cattle in his pasture that I started out with I think I bought 6 or 8 cows from him on the first go around, and some of them at that time, there, WR breeding was pretty prevalent, so it was easy to get a little bit familiar with them. So yeah, JB was the one that got me going for sure.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar, give us a brief history lesson on the importance of JB and his role kind of early on there in the breed.
Well, JB was just an incredible marketing guy, and he, I don't think he ever met a stranger. He was an incredible salesman by trade and by, and he got into the Longhorns, and I don't know, for the longest, you couldn't hardly find anybody that hadn't traded or bought cattle from JB across the industry. I mean, he was just everywhere. and he was good for the breed, and he sure got me started, and he helped me. This is you buy these, and this is a good way to market them. And at that time, I found JB in the classified section because the internet wasn't around, and you found him in the classifieds, and he said, if you want to sell cattle, you got to get in front of people. And I shudder to think what JB would have done with the internet. He'd owned it or something, who knows? But JB was good for the Longhorn industry, and I miss him. And even his he had a couple of kids that were involved for a while, and I think his daughter was really involved for a long time, but I miss that family. I do.
Well, do you remember some of those first ones that you got from him, and did they play kind of an integral part in building your herd, or talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm going to say there's one cow. She was a little kind of a light colored, almost, it wasn't white, just a muddy colored, and had every speck of color on her that you could imagine from head to toe. And she was a Spring Lakes branded cow. She was they had is SL 281, I believe, and the Spring Lake cattle were all straight WR. One of the managers from the refuge had helped start a herd down in South Texas and Central Texas, and with WR cattle, and mainly heifers from the sale, and they called them Spring Lakes. And JB helped me with that and explained to me who that was, about Gene Bartnicki and all of that, and I have two of her daughters still today. They're getting some age on them. But I ended up, when I would go to a sale and I found a Spring Lakes cow, well, I knew exactly what they were. And as late as the 90s, Spring Lakes was already gone, but there were a few of those cows floating around. I think I even bought one from Odell Hunt up there in Oklahoma that he had in his herd at one time. So every time I found one, I'd buy her and add her to the herd because I knew what they were, good old stuff.
So talk to me a little bit about that again, for maybe folks who aren't as well versed as yourself in there. When you say they were good stuff and they were WR, branded bred, what does that mean?
Well, man, that's a big deal.
I know, right? I'm putting the pressure on you here, James.
I mean, that's the foundation of every cow that we have on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. You go back, and that's what I like about the hired hands stuff, is that, one thing that kind of wanted me to get my website with y'all was your pedigree and being able to connect the dots. And it's always easy to tell somebody, well, if you go back far enough, you're going to find WR cattle in the pedigrees of your cattle that you have. And, for a large degree, if you can go back far enough. But the WR cattle, they were just the foundation cattle, and I guess up until probably they started having sales up there in the 40s, and only until about 4 or 5 years ago did they quit having sales at the refuge. They would quit at like number 74 for their annual sale. But those cattle up there, as far as I know, that's the most natural selection. Those and the cattle that are at Fort Niobrara, not Niobrara, but Fort Robinson today. That was the other government herd beside the WR. And the WR is today the most naturally breeding selected group of cows that are out there, where they really don't have any influence or very little influence from what anybody else wants to see. I think they're mandated by Congress to have about 250 animals or something like that, and they've probably got 30 bulls out there with those cows. And those bulls don't ever come off of the refuge. They just fade away. And so the breeding selection is natural. And you can go up there and look at the cows and see that, they still have a good look to them in every way.
So you mentioned, that you go back through a lot of the pedigrees and look, and, how everything kind of goes back to, or not everything, but a lot goes back to,
Right.
A WR bred animal. What do you feel like are kind of those telltale signs where, you as a seasoned breeder in that can maybe just look and be like, yeah, that animal's got WR in there somewhere?
Well, there's a little bit of diversity in all of the cattle. I mean, you and your siblings don't all look alike, and same with the cattle. They've got such a diverse genetic makeup that they're not all going to look the same. But when you start from one end to the other, and I'm not a cow judge by any means, but I know what I like in an animal. And, when you can find one with more of a round ear than a pointed, well, then that just kind of leads you away from some of the African influence in cattle. The more pointed, is, that's something that's probably a little less desirable for me. One, breeder over in East Texas, he says, man, he said, you get a lot of these shoe sole ears on cattle these days. And he said it's just the kind of a middle between the pointed and the coffee cup round. And that, and when I look at a cow, that's what, or a bull, any of them, I just look at, I like to look at their ears right off the bat and make sure that they got a lot of hair in them, and just start with that, and a long, narrow head. Those just little things like that is stuff that I start to look for. And then I guess the basic size of an animal, those animals up there at the refuge, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a cow that weighed much over 1,000 pounds. And probably most of them are going to be in that 900 range. And, so a smaller frame cow with some, attractive ears and, long head, nice tail set. And of course, I guess probably just as important as their ears is their udder, to have a good bag and just simple things like that, pretty kind of, I call it simple, but it's amazing. People come out first time looking at cows, and, you need to walk through all of that and tell them about it. So it's nice to have these WR cows that, and Yates cattle both, that, that embellish all of those characteristics throughout a herd, not just one animal, but you go look at all of them, and they're all emblematic of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, who do you think is the most influential WR bull out there?
At one time I would have probably thought that, 2935 was probably one of the most influential, maybe 2308. But, and maybe because they just had the most notoriety, kind of like, back in those days, 2935 probably had the, if you'd have had the internet capabilities and the way of promoting them they do now, he'd be the same as a cowboy tough check bull that Bob Loomis raised. He's probably just as popular back then as that bull is today. So I would say something along that line of the the 2935, or he's got a half brother that was a 3465, and at that time they were just starting to put a focus on tip to tip, and he was one of the largest horned solid black bulls. And black bulls for a while, they weren't really known for having a lot of horn, but 3465 did. And and I've got a daughter that was a double bred daughter of 3465, and I've got two of her daughters here in my pasture today. So, and that, and for the WR type cows, they probably got a little bit more horn than the rest of them. They're a little more. They all got a lot of. I wouldn't call it twist. They got a lot of curve, a lot of character to them, but they're not hard twisting animals like that. But I'd say those two bulls would probably be my most popular ones. And
are there any WR bred cows out there that you feel like are the most influential
today?
Yeah.
There's one cow that's up on the refuge, and she's become a superstar. she's a solid red cow, and she's got triple twisted horns, and people have been looking at her and posting pictures of her. She's just a phenomenal cow, and in every way. I don't know how old she is, because she's WR branded, of course, but she doesn't have a number because they quit keeping pedigrees up there maybe close to 20 years ago, 18, 20 years, something like that. And so she doesn't have a number, so we don't know who she's out of, sire or dam, but she is an incredible individual. And she gets a lot of notoriety on Facebook. If you go to the WR page, or they've got a home page, and a lot of people up there will take pictures of her. But she's a pretty special cow today from the refuge. There's no doubt. And she'll be there, and she'll, I know she's got at least one daughter up there that they've retained. So, yeah, I'd say that'd be her.
Well, give us a little history lesson on Yates breeding, since that's kind of the other, pillar of your program. Tell us where that started and what that all goes back to.
Well, the Yates part of it, and they're kind of intertwined. I know the Fayette Yates, he passed away about 2007, I believe, something like that. And his dad, Cap Yates, they raised these Longhorns in South Texas and parts of Mexico. And, and at any given time probably had as many as 500 of these cows. And they're the, twisty horn, small frame, surviving type cattle. And Fayette, he was, I don't know if he was number one, but he was probably in the top 5 or 6 of the initial founding members of the TLBAA back in the, 63, 64, something like that, when it was started. So he's been around for a long time, and promoting these same type cattle. And I know he was influential and had some influence, and had some of his bulls that went to the refuge at one time. They I don't exactly know how those deals went, but they would put some of his bulls up there that were, old timey style bulls, just to get some fresh blood, different blood up there. But I don't think they've added anything at the refuge probably in 30 years or more. I couldn't say exactly, but fed. He, like I say, they raised a lot of the same kind of cattle. So to me, being coming in the 90s, those cattle are there's a lot the same. There's a few horn differences but it's hard to tell, where they came from exactly. If it's more WR influence or more Yates, but they blend nicely together. I'll say that.
So do you feel like there's a Yates bull that's been the most influential, or maybe a Yates cow in this case?
There was some, probably as much by names as they were by anything, but Bull called Bravo. He was when there wasn't very many bulls around, these type bulls that 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 could make an impact with a small number of breeders. Well, he would. It seemed to be like he made a bigger splash. He was one. There's another one that people have some animals out of. Called him Pretty Boy. All these bulls were out of triple twisted horn cows, and they those are the couple that just stand out to me probably more than any other. I found it kind of interesting, when I was thinking about this a little bit. That's kind of the beauty of these older cattle, is that there's not one particular cow, there's not one particular bull that has a right, or doesn't have any, he doesn't deserve or doesn't get any more favoritism over another one, because they're all so equal in so many categories, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's not one single component or trait of these old cattle that make them stand out. They're all good bulls, and you just kind of get down to which one that you like, or which one, which one's the best in a small pasture and which one's the best in a big pasture.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so they would, I think, and the same thing for the cows. You find cows that can consistently produce under different bulls. You just can't hang your hat on one single animal and say, man, this guy needs to, he needs to be over every cow so we get all of him. That's probably the worst thing you could do, as far as I'm concerned, is because, man, you get really single focused on something that bull can do. And I promise you, there's a hole in him somewhere. There's something that's not 100% about him. So having more bulls with versatility is really the key to what we try to do with these older type cattle, is, don't get hung up in one direction.
Love what you're hearing? Be sure to check out our Pickup Truck Confessions.
It's a video series where we hop in the truck or rental car and interview a variety of breeders about what drives their passion for their livestock, how they got started in the breed of their choice, marketing tips, and more.
And now, back to the podcast.
What else have you found works well for you, in your own program, with everything that you've learned and seen, these past 30 years?
I don't know that there's to be honest with you, I'm probably more encouraged now. When I started with these cows, they were 100% middle of the road kind of cow. They weren't the top end of anything, and but they were cows that I liked, and then that you could connect the dots, and the history all matched. I don't know if that, they look like what you read about. They look like what the old pictures, showed. And so probably today that these cattle are probably less in demand in the Longhorn industry as a whole. What I get the most satisfaction out of is some of the older members, longtime breeders saying, "Man, I didn't even know you were out there. Can I get a bull from you? Can I get a couple of heifers from you?" And and I think a lot of the breeders that raise these kind of cows, I think that's a pretty common thread these days, that people looking for a piece of history and just kind of a step back just a little bit and take a breath from the horn race.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that with my next question. So when you came to us to get started with your website, you and I had a couple talks about the best way to go about it. And at the end of the day, you decided that you were going to put a website up, but you weren't going to necessarily tie your animals into our pedigree system. So your website is only pictures of the animals, no names, no sire dams, nothing else. And folks have to call you or email you for more information. Talk to me about why you chose to do it that way and how that has worked and benefited you.
Well, they're just like I am. Nobody knows me, so it doesn't really matter. and the cows are a lot the same way. You could talk about the pedigrees, and I've got some cows here that I bought from a guy. One cow's 20. We call her Cayenne, and then like the pepper, and then she's out of a cow called Red Hot, and we will name a lot of these cows, and we'll talk about them, and we'll put names on their papers as just kind of a reference that way. And I think a lot of people do that, but nobody knows who they are anyway. And a lot of the registry, since these cows kind of got lost I guess ever since about 91 or so, the early 90s, when the registry started, they just kind of separated because they 100% didn't have the same goals in mind long term for what the cows, what they felt like the cows needed to be. So not putting pedigrees on there, I just did it because I didn't think anybody would even know who they were.
Well, see, James, I feel like we're going to have to take a poll now after this podcast releases. And I have a feeling you're going to be hearing a lot that you need to go back and folks would love to see where some of these came from.
Well, we have some, and to that point, there's some good news. There's I don't know. I hope it's okay to call names. We've called a few already, but I've got a friend that's bought some animals from me. His name's David Wars, and David went to get take a bull registered, and and the bull didn't have a pedigree. He was just Yates, and and the registry has a program, has a process that we do, how we register and accept bulls, and it's pretty strict. It's a small window they got to get through, and they got to be 2 years old before they're even considered. And when he bought this bull, and he was a product of an older cow and a 10-year-old bull at the time that Lawrence Wallace had raised, and there was no pedigrees on them, but they passed the DNA test that we have today. They both passed the visual inspection that we have, and so the sire and the dam, they went through that. And when kind of getting back to the point, is the question was that when David took these cows to the TOBAA to get them registered, they just put, I think they just put CTLR, cow or bull, sire and dam on there. And he goes, well, he said, they have a pedigree. They have at least a sire now that has a number, and they have a dam that has a CTLR number. And because of the historical significance of these animals, they deserve to do that. And man, I give a huge amount of credit to the board at the TLBA for making it to where they accepted that, and they started that when they had an opportunity, or one of these animals came up that was not in their database, they could add it, and they did that. And I really do. I hats off to them for 100% for doing that and recognizing it, because man, that's turning around and looking back over your shoulder at the cattle behind you, not just the ones in front. So, we're working on a new database for the cattle that we have, and like to be able to get that out there. So, some of the cattle have a lot of pedigrees. You can get 5 or 6 generations, and through the registry and everything, we have some records, but it's just kind of been under the radar, I guess, if you will, because these cattle just haven't been that much in demand. But it really seems to, ever since I got a website hooked up with, y'all built me a website and people started seeing it, I've got calls from people that I would have never expected to get calls from, 30, 40-year members, people that have been members of the CTLR or the TLBAA, mm-hmm. since the 70s, and say, man, I'd like to have one of your bulls, It's a pretty big deal when Jack Phillips' daughter calls you and wants a bull.
Oh, wow. I got to hear this story now. Let's hear this one.
I ran some ads, and, it's just a little bit of exposure, and I don't know if it was from the website or the ads, but I think a combination of both, because they could stop and see the pictures. But I got a phone call from his daughter, and unfortunately, she's quite the cow woman herself, and she had had a horse wreck, working cows, and I believe what the story was. But her son came up here, and I sent them some pictures, and they bought a bull out of a Yates cow and a WR bull that I had. And I mean, he was, I think when that guy gets full grown, he probably won't have 40 inches of tip to tip, but they were very functional type horns, and he's just a nice individual. And, getting some validation like that from somebody that's seen as many cows as anybody, and, they still maintain, some Longhorns as well as some commercial cows, but mm-hmm. that was that was a big deal. It was like I say, a lot of validation for me, and it comes more regular now than it used to, and I think a lot of that's got to do with the website too. So thank you again.
Of course, thank you. Let's get back to a question I was going to ask before we had to hear the Phillips story. You've talked a lot about CTLR, but I don't think a lot of folks know that registry is out there. It's just not something that's as familiar. I know when you came to us for the website, I had to educate myself about it, and you were kind enough to kind of tell me the history. So why don't you go ahead and repeat some of that for our listeners now?
Well, there's a lot there, and you slow me down or stop me, whatever. But it was established in about 91, and oddly enough, some of the founding members of the TLBAA were the same founding people of the CTLR. CTLR stands for the Cattlemen's Texas Longhorn Registry. And we have a registry, and then we also have a conservancy side, which all the cattle organizations have one. They got a call it a research site or a, a place that where you can accept gifts. But anyway, we it was started in '91. Enrique Guerra, Fayette Yates, Maudine Marks is another one, one of the 7 families, that we hear about that's pretty common. These were all people that felt like that they needed to make a concerted effort, a concentrated effort to preserve the cattle, because by the '90s, things were starting to go at, the focus on horns was the big focus. And these people felt like that, we need to look at the whole animal. And that's kind of how it got started. And ever since then, it's just, I guess the TLBAA, I don't know if they'd have started on the same page at the same time, I don't know which one would be where, but the CTLR has certainly taken a back seat to the other 2 big organizations, the TLBAA and the ITLA, and in which I've been a member of both, and glad that I am. The CTLR is just, they're just a very small group of breeders that's really committed to maintaining the historical original type Longhorn cow.
And that's how all your current herd is registered, correct?
Well, I've got a lot that are dual registered with the TLBAA. They've always accepted our cattle in both associations, the ITLA and the TLBAA. But all of my cattle are CTLR registered, and some are in the ITLA. I might have misspoke a little bit. I'm not sure if my ITLA membership is up to date, but my TLBA is supposed to be. But yeah,
we'll let that slide.
Yeah, thank you. Hall pass.
If that's the worst thing you forget today, we're in good shape, right? Well, this next question might be a little bit controversial, I guess, but I know you talked a little bit earlier in the podcast about ear shape and, that's head length, some of those sorts of traits. But are there any specific animals today in the tip-to-tip portion of the industry that you feel also kind of just embody that, that original Texas Longhorn, or have aspects of it that appeal to you?
Well, I'm gonna, like I say, you might have covered it. That the answer is no, and the reason is that when you look at the animals, I feel like I've been extremely fortunate to be able to have a look at animals personally that were around in the early '90s. And like I talked about, I remember everybody in the breed wanted animals that were 50-inch horn animals. There was a bull way back called Whelming King. I don't know if you remember him or not. And I think I think Ben Gravitt ended up owning him, and he went to Virginia. But he was here in Texas for a while. And I'm not sure if any of the Glendennings owned that bull or not, or had any interest in him. But I think there was some progeny of his that was out there. And seeing where those animals were at that time and see where they are today, I don't think there's a lot of room in the pasture for them with the old-timey cows. They just don't match up hardly in any way. And I don't blame anybody for wanting to raise those cattle. I've always said people ought to raise what they like looking at, because they're going to pay for them, they're going to feed them, and they got to take care of them. So you better have what you enjoy. I like the iconic. I like the old timey cow. Nobody else might like them, but me. And a few of my old friends.
Well, one thing we always ask folks on our podcast is what advice you would give to new breeders who, know that they like Longhorns, aren't sure how to get started or what to get started with. So I want to ask you that same question. I have a feeling your answer will be completely different than anything we've heard so far. So I'm gonna buckle in here while you answer it.
Well, like I just said, I encourage people to buy what they like looking at, 100%. And for if you, what I hear more than anything else these days is I like the traditional type cow, and that's kind of what the Longhorn embodies. That's the iconic part of it, is the history component. And if you want to, you go look at Alan Rogers' pictures of his museum, and Lord, if you get a chance to go see it in person, it's even better. But you just look at the pictures of those cattle from the 1800s that he has in there, and they don't look like the cattle today. So I would encourage anybody, if you want, do a little bit of homework and figure out and realize that there are some different types of cattle out there with Longhorns, and there's and I think they're as different as night and day. I would say do your research, do some looking, and see what you want, and buy the cattle that you enjoy looking at. That's what I'd tell somebody.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join me today. Is there anything that I haven't asked or we haven't covered that you want to share while we're together here?
I don't think so. I think we've talked about the history part enough, and where they came from and these cattle. And like I say, I'd like to, I get a big kick out going on looking at other people's websites, on Hired Hand. When y'all have these featured sites and ranches and stuff up there, and go look, and I always go to as far back as I can look on their pedigrees to see what's back there, and look for that validation on these old timey cows, and see that this is where they started. But man, we've covered a lot of territory, and I really do appreciate you letting me get on here and talk about these cows a little bit.
Of course, I'm glad you had time to join us. We appreciate it as well.
All right.